or something like that. And then we have Bush. And as we know, Bush's presidency is kind of coined by the 9/11 terrorist attack, which means that domestic spending was kind of forgotten about. And then down here, this is an image in Cincinnati. So there's this place in Cincinnati called Over the Rhine. And it was historically a place where government housing was, and where predominantly poor neighborhood. But it's been revitalized in the last 5 or 6 years to be this new hipster up and coming place. It's now called OTR. So it's gentrification, so now we're pushing out affordable housing. So these are kind of all the things that led up to this problem of homelessness that we have now. So researcher Courtney Cronley says, the process of social construction, or the creation of meaning by a group, has contributed to public policy that is based less on empirically derived knowledge and more on public perceptions of homelessness. So instead of focusing on the reasons why people are homeless, such as lack of a home or lack of affordable housing, we're focusing on reasons such as mental illness, drug addiction, and stuff like that. So my methodology for this paper was I used a GSS, a general social survey, and the sample demographics that I used were, like I mentioned before, sex, income, education, and race. So there was different sample sizes for each variable that I have. So these are some of the variables that I have here, like opinions on should the government provide health care for mental illness, government spending on employment benefits, welfare, spending assistance to big cities, should we contribute to homelessness? And I kind of had to focus my research on homelessness and the poor population because there wasn't a lot of variables in the GSS to just focus on the homeless population. So that's why that's there. So this is continued. So the type of analysis I did was cross-tabs, which is basically a cross-examination of 2 of the variables. So maybe like sex and, should we provide housing for people or something like that. So this is an example of it. So I have the respondent's income on the left-hand side, and at the top I have should the government redistribute wealth. So here I changed it into percent so it's easier to see the significance of it. So income cross-tab with should government redistribute wealth. So 40% of people who made under $25,000 a year agree or strongly agree that government should provide housing, whereas only 6% over $25,000 a year agree or strongly agree with this. So you can see the relationship between the demographics and the different variables that are used. So my results, my hypothesis was that these were going to be all positively correlated, that people who were in the quote minority group for each of the demographics were going to want more government assistance in some way. So respondents with lower incomes wanted more government assistance in all categories. Black respondents versus white respondents wanted more government assistance in all categories. Female versus male wanted more government assistance. And then education was a little bit different because there's different results because more often lower education led to more assistance. But a lot of times you would think that, or hope at least, that people with higher education would want to help people more. But usually higher education equates with a higher income, so they have more money that would put them in a different category of high income, which in high income you have the same thing where they are not as receptive to government assistance. So this is really important results because it shows that the people who are usually needing the help, like low income, people who don't have a lot of education, want more government help, but the people who have the power to help them, people who have the access to to more money, to more healthcare, to all those types of things, aren't really understanding the struggles that they're facing. So my results directly related to my question. My expected results were confirmed that the minority groups for each demographic would want more government assistance. So here's some result analysis. So this shows each one for government should provide housing to the poor. So you can see 31% of whites should not be, whereas 8% of blacks said should not be. 77% of females should be, and 66% of men should be, and that's for providing housing again. And then 75% of under 25,000 should be, and 18% of above 25,000 should be. So you can see the direct correlation. And these directly tied to the American ideals that we enforce in our public policy, such as individualism, masculinity, the American dream. So the idea is that if you are homeless, it's probably your fault, therefore it's your responsibility to get out of it, which is why a lot of times we focus on programs such as like, 3 days in a homeless shelter and then you're kind of sent off to do your own thing, assuming that you can get it all back together within those 3 days of help, or only providing help for people who have drug abuse, assuming that everyone who is homeless as a result of drug abuse. So some more results that I had. So this one was really interesting because this focused more on the language of the stigma. So I kept one demographic, which was sex, and through the research, I had to kind of work with a lot of questions that were really similar. And at first, I was a little bit annoyed by this because I was like, okay, all these questions are the same. I need something a little different. But then I started recognizing the language between the questions, and that actually led to one of the biggest findings in my research was that, so respondent sex, up in the right-hand category, you can see this is welfare. So basically it was asking, what's your opinion on government spending for welfare? And so the options were too little, about right, too much, or and that was it. And so you can see that 47% of females said too much and 49% of males said too much. And neither of these were above 50%, but you can see that women were less likely to say too much than men. But then when you go down and you see assistance to the poor, this is a little bit of a lighter phrase rather than welfare because there's a negative connotation with the word welfare in our country. So you can see that 67% of females said too little and 62% of men said too little. But overall, you can see how the percentage went up immediately when we changed the word from welfare to assistance to the poor because that's more friendly in our language. So then to the right, you come and it's caring for the poor, which is like the most friendly term that we could use to help people in a situation. And that had the most positive results where 74% of females said we're doing too little and 64% of males said we're doing too little. So just in this, you can see how our use of language in the question measures the stigmas that we have. And a lot of our public policy uses the stigmatized version of these. So, we don't have, public policy that's crafted that says like caring for the poor, Act 5 or whatever. We have, the Welfare Act and Medicare and Medicaid, which all have negative stigmas. So the programs that are meant to help these people aren't getting the support that they need because of the stigma that's associated with it in our country. And basically, the limitations of my research were that I didn't have enough information on specifically the homeless population because people who are homeless typically aren't on the general social survey to take answer questions and whatnot. So that was a little bit of a barrier, and also it was a barrier that I didn't kind of like double tab. So like, what did Black women say versus Black men say about a certain topic, or like government providing housing, because I think there might be a little bit more specificity in the results that I found if I would have like double analyzed different roles, or like white women, white men, or something of the sort. So that is all. Thank you.